He could hear them crying through the walls. 23 children trapped in a basement beneath tons of rubble, their voices growing weaker with each passing hour. Staff Sergeant Michael Thornton wiped the sweat from his eyes, staring at the device that shouldn't exist. Not here. Not in a school. The bomb was crude but lethal, wires twisted like veins across its metal heart. One wrong move, and those children would join the thousands already lost in Fallujah's streets. His hands, the same hands that had held his newborn daughter just months ago, now hovered over death itself. "Get out," he whispered to his team. "All of you." Now, they knew better than to argue. In the suffocating heat of Iraq, 2004, heroes weren't born from glory. They were forged in moments when everyone else walked away, when the smart thing was to run, when protocol said wait for the bomb squad that wouldn't arrive for hours. But those weren't just statistics crying beneath the debris. They were someone's everything, someone's reason to keep breathing in a world torn apart by war. Michael's radio crackled. Command wanted updates. The insurgents who planted this device were still out there waiting. Time wasn't just running out, it was bleeding away with every sob from below. He thought of Sarah back home, his wife who kissed him goodbye at Fort Hood, pretending she wasn't terrified. Who sent him photos of their daughter's first smile while he patrolled streets where smiles had become extinct. She'd understand. Even if this went wrong, she'd understand why he couldn't walk away. The first wire came free easier than expected. Too easy. His grandfather had defused German mines in World War II with nothing but steady hands and pure nerve. Different war, same principle. Death didn't care about your fear, it only respected precision. Through the broken concrete, a small voice called out in Arabic. Then in broken English, "Please, help us." They were losing hope. In war, hope died faster than bodies, but not today. Not on his watch. 3 hours earlier, the school had been full of laughter, children learning mathematics, dreaming of futures their parents never had. Then the mortars started falling. The teacher, a woman named Fatima who'd refused to stop teaching despite the threats, had herded them all downstairs. She'd saved their lives. Now she lay unconscious, blood pooling beneath her headscarf. Michael had seen enough war to know its patterns. This wasn't random. The insurgents had targeted the school specifically. These children were being educated in English, taught by Iraqis who believed in a different future. That made them enemies in someone's twisted logic. His unit had been clearing houses 2 blocks away when the explosion shook the earth. Protocol said secure the perimeter first. Protocol said wait for specialized units. Protocol hadn't heard children screaming. The bomb was connected to the building's foundation. Pull the wrong wire and 40 tons of concrete would complete what the mortars had started. Michael traced each connection with his eyes, mapping the killer's logic. Every bomb maker had a signature. This one was methodical, patient, someone who took pride in their work. "Thornton, this is command. EOD is 30 minutes out. Do not attempt." He turned off his radio. 30 minutes might as well be 30 years. Those children didn't have 30 minutes. Their cries were already growing softer, oxygen running thin in their concrete tomb. His hands were steady, but his mind raced. Every soldier in Iraq carried ghosts. The faces of those they couldn't save, the split-second decisions that haunted their dreams. If he failed here, 23 more ghosts would join his collection. 23 small ghosts who just wanted to learn how to read, but failure wasn't what scared him most. It was the thought of walking away, of being the soldier who followed orders while innocents died. His daughter would grow up in a world shaped by moments like this, by people who chose courage over protocol. The second wire revealed itself, blue, wrapped around a mercury switch. One tremor, one wrong breath, and it would complete the circuit. Michael's world narrowed to that single strand of copper. Nothing existed beyond it, not the war, not the heat, not even the fear, just him and the wire and the fading voices below. In Ramadi, a soldier had tried something similar. They'd shipped him home in pieces, but that soldier hadn't heard what Michael heard now. A child singing softly in Arabic, trying to calm the others. In all his years of war, across Afghanistan's mountains and Iraq's burning cities, he'd never heard anything more brave. The singing child was named Yasmin, 8 years old, with dreams of becoming a doctor. She'd watched her father die in crossfire 6 months ago, had seen her brother recruited by men who promised revenge, but she'd chosen differently. She'd chosen books over bullets, hope over hate. Now she sang her mother's lullabies to keep the younger ones from panic. Michael's fingers worked with surgical precision. Each wire told a story. The bomb maker had been trained, possibly in Iran, definitely by someone who understood American tactics. They'd anticipated an EOD robot, had built countermeasures for standard procedures. But they hadn't anticipated this, a soldier on his knees, working by touch and instinct. The mercury switch disarmed with a soft click. 1 death trap down, 3 more to go. His back screamed from the awkward position, sweat stinging his eyes. But pain was just information. It told him he was still alive, still fighting. Through his peripheral vision, he saw movement. His team had disobeyed orders, forming a protective perimeter. If insurgents came now, they'd buy him time with their lives. That's what brothers did in war. They didn't abandon each other even when orders demanded it. 10 minutes, Sergeant Rodriguez whispered. That's all EOD needs, 10 minutes. Michael had once held his breath underwater for 4 minutes during training. Time was elastic in crisis. 10 minutes could feel like 10 hours or 10 seconds, depending on how death chose to play it. The third wire cluster was a decoy. Dummy wires meant to confuse, to force a mistake. Michael had seen this technique in Afghanistan, learned to recognize the subtle differences in wire gauge, the slight discoloration where real current flowed. The bomb maker had been clever, but not clever enough. Below, the singing stopped. Panic seized his chest harder than any physical blow. Then he heard coughing. They were running out of air, but they were alive. Still alive. Still worth saving. His grandmother had survived the London Blitz as a child. She'd told him stories of sheltering in underground stations, of ordinary people becoming extraordinary when the bombs fell. Courage, she'd said, isn't the absence of fear. It's fear holding its breath while you do what's right. The fourth wire assembly was the real killer. Multiple redundancies, pressure-sensitive triggers, even a timer he hadn't noticed before. Red numbers counting down from 4:47. When had it started? How long had he been working? Time meant nothing and everything simultaneously. His hands moved without conscious thought now. Muscle memory from 1,000 training exercises, from nights spent studying blast patterns until his eyes burned. Every soldier prepared for death. Not every soldier prepared to prevent it with their bare hands. 4:15 remaining. In North Carolina, his daughter would be waking from her afternoon nap. Sarah would be warming a bottle, checking her phone for messages that couldn't come. Operational security meant silence. It meant families waiting in agony for any word, good or bad. The timer was connected to a secondary device, a failsafe designed to detonate if the primary trigger failed. Michael traced the wiring back to its source, found the power supply hidden beneath rubble. Whoever built this had wanted those children dead. Had wanted to send a message written in young blood. He'd seen that message before, in a Kandahar marketplace where families shopped for food, in a Baghdad mosque where people sought peace. The message was always the same. Nowhere is safe. No one is innocent. Hope is the enemy. But messages could be rewritten. Every life saved was a sentence in a different story. Every act of courage was punctuation against terror's narrative. Those children below weren't just victims, they were 23 arguments for a better world. 3:42 remaining. His fingers found the timer's weakness, a solder joint done hastily, probably under pressure. The bomb maker had been rushed, forced to work faster than preferred. Maybe they'd heard the American patrols approaching. Maybe they'd been as scared as Michael was now. Strange, how war humanized even monsters. Somewhere, the person who'd built this device had been a child too, had learned their deadly craft from someone else carrying wounds. The cycle of violence spinning endlessly unless someone, somewhere, chose to break it. The joint separated with delicate pressure. The timer stopped at 3:31, but the bomb remained armed, still connected to pressure plates, still ready to complete its terrible purpose. Victory, in increments, that's how impossible things got done. Through the ruins, he heard Yasmin singing again. Softer now, but unbroken. How did children find such strength? What reservoir of hope let them sing in the face of annihilation? Maybe that's why they were targeted, because their hope was more dangerous than any weapon. His radio, abandoned on the ground, squawked with increasing urgency. Command wanted answers. The perimeter teams were reporting movement, insurgents probing their defenses, testing for weakness. Time wasn't just running out, it was under assault from every direction. But Michael had found his rhythm now. Each wire, each connection, each small victory building toward salvation. His hands were instruments of precision, guided by training and something more, something his drill sergeant could never have taught, something that came from being a father, a husband, a human being who refused to let darkness win. The pressure plates were connected to a dead man's switch. Release the wrong one, and the bomb would interpret it as the building settling, triggering detonation. Michael studied the arrangement, saw the elegant cruelty in its design. This wasn't just about killing, it was about ensuring any rescue attempt became a suicide mission. In the distance, gunfire erupted. His team was engaging hostiles, buying time with bullets. The distinctive crack of M4 rifles mixed with the harsh bark of AK-47s. A firefight in an urban maze, where every window might hide a sniper, every doorway could conceal death, but those sounds felt distant, muffled by his total focus. The bomb was a puzzle written in copper and explosive. Each wire was a word, each connection a sentence. He was reading a story of hate, translating it letter by letter into hope. The first pressure plate disarmed smoothly. 1 down, 2 to go. His knees had gone numb against the concrete, his back spasming with each movement. Pain was temporary. Those children's deaths would be forever. He thought of the school's teacher, Fatima, who'd built this place with donations and dreams. Who'd faced death threats for teaching girls to read, for suggesting that knowledge was more powerful than violence. She lay unconscious, possibly dying, but her students lived because of her quick thinking. Heroes wore many faces in war. The second pressure plate was corroded, its contacts unreliable. That made it more dangerous, not less. Unpredictability was death's favorite tool. Michael cleaned the contacts with his shirt, tasting copper and fear in the desert air. Below, someone was praying. The words were Arabic, but the tone was universal. A child bargaining with God, promising to be good, to help their mother, to study hard if only they could see the sun again. Every religion sounded the same when whispered by the terrified young. The plate came free. Michael's hands were trembling now, exhaustion and adrenaline fighting for control. One more plate. One more impossible task before 23 futures could begin. But the final plate was different, modified. Additional wires led away into the rubble, connecting to something he couldn't see. A secondary device, another trap? Or just the paranoid redundancy of a bomb maker who trusted nothing and no one? He had to choose, follow the wires blindly into the unknown, or work with what he could see and pray it was enough. In war, information was life. But sometimes, waiting for perfect information meant waiting too long. Michael chose to trace the wires. They led through a gap in the rubble, forcing him to wedge himself into a space barely wide enough for his shoulders. Concrete pressed against him from all sides, a tomb within a tomb. If the building shifted now, he'd die inches from the children he was trying to save. The wires terminated at a second device. Smaller, hidden, designed to detonate if the primary bomb was disarmed. The bomb maker's final insult, their last attempt to ensure tragedy. But they'd made one mistake. They'd assumed whoever found it would be wearing bomb disposal gear, would be too bulky to reach this far. They hadn't planned on a soldier willing to strip away armor, to make himself vulnerable to save others. Michael's bare hands worked in near darkness, feeling his way through the device's construction. Every texture told a story: smooth plastic, rough tape, the bite of exposed wire. Outside, the firefight intensified. An explosion, RPG or mortar, shook dust from the ceiling. His team was paying for every second he spent here. Good men bleeding for a chance at miracle. The secondary device was simpler, almost amateur. Maybe the bomb maker had run out of sophisticated materials, or maybe they'd never expected anyone to get this far. Arrogance was often the terrorists' downfall. They believed too deeply in their own invincibility. Wire by wire, connection by connection, Michael unmade their work. His fingers were bloody now, cut by sharp metal and rough concrete. Blood made things slippery, dangerous, but he couldn't stop. Stopping meant accepting defeat. In the basement, Yasmin had stopped singing. The silence was worse than screams. It meant resignation, meant hope dying in 23 young hearts. Michael worked faster, precision battling panic for control of his hands. The final wire came free. The secondary device died with a soft hiss like a snake's last breath. But there was no celebration, no moment of triumph. The primary bomb still waited, still promised death to any mistake. He crawled backward, concrete tearing at his clothes and skin. Every inch was agony, every movement a victory against claustrophobia and exhaustion. When he finally emerged, Rodriguez was there, hauling him free with blood-slicked hands. 2 minutes until EOD, Rodriguez gasped. A field dressing wrapped his left arm. He'd been hit but hadn't abandoned his post. That was the infantry way. You stood your ground until standing became falling, and then you crawled. 2 minutes. Michael looked at the primary device's final pressure plate, looked at the concrete slowly crushing those children's sanctuary. 2 minutes might as well be 2 years. The building was dying, and it would take them all with it when it fell. The final pressure plate was welded to the building's main support beam. Removing it would require cutting tools he didn't have, time that didn't exist. But Michael had learned something in his years of war. Sometimes the solution wasn't to disarm the trap, but to change its nature. He studied the beam, the way concrete had spalled around impact points. The building was already compromised. What if, instead of preventing the explosion, he could direct it? Channel its force away from the basement, up and out, where it would harm only empty air. It was insane. The kind of desperate gambit that got soldiers posthumous medals. But those children were still breathing below, still clinging to life by threads of hope. Insane was all he had left. Using debris as tools, he began reshaping the bomb's housing. Every adjustment risked detonation, but physics was physics. Explosions followed paths of least resistance. Create the right path, and death might miss its intended victims. His team had pushed the insurgents back, buying precious ground with courage and ammunition. But Michael could hear the concern in their voices, the unspoken questions. How long could they hold? How many more minutes could they purchase with blood? The work was brutal, primitive. Sledgehammer surgery on a device designed for delicate murder. His engineering training at Fort Leonard Wood seemed a lifetime ago, but the principles remained. Force equals mass times acceleration. Direct the force, save the mass below. Sweat mixed with blood on his hands, making everything treacherous. One slip now would render everything meaningless. All the sacrifice, all the courage, reduced to a crater and silence. But his hands stayed steady. They had to. 23 reasons breathed shallowly in the darkness below. 23 futures depending on a sergeant who'd volunteered for infantry because he wanted to make a difference. Rodriguez appeared again, limping but armed. EOD's here, he said. They're ordering you to stop. Michael didn't stop. Couldn't stop. He was too deep in the device's logic now, too committed to the desperate plan. EOD could court-martial him later. If there was a later. The final adjustment clicked into place. The bomb was still armed, still deadly, but now its hatred pointed skyward instead of down. Now it would scream at heaven instead of stealing children from Earth. Everyone back, Michael ordered. Far back, now. They obeyed, even the EOD team. They recognized the tone, a man who'd crossed from soldier to something else, something necessary and terrible and absolutely committed. Michael stayed. Someone had to ensure the device remained oriented correctly. Someone had to be the final guardian between death and innocence. He'd made his peace with that truth 5 minutes and a lifetime ago. He triggered the dead man's switch. The explosion, when it came, was directed exactly as he'd planned. The blast wave rushed upward, punching through already weakened floors, venting into empty sky. The building shuddered, groaned, but held. Below, protected by physics and sacrifice, 23 children drew breath. The concussion threw Michael backward, slamming him into rubble. His ears rang with the sound of survival, his body screaming protests he couldn't afford to acknowledge, but he was alive. More importantly, they were alive. Hands pulled at him. His team, EOD, medics who'd appeared from nowhere. Everyone moving with the desperate efficiency of those who'd witnessed miracle and weren't about to waste it. Equipment appeared, cutting tools, oxygen, hope made manifest in military hardware. It took 3 hours to free them all. 3 hours of careful excavation, of coaxing terrified children toward daylight. Yasmin came out singing, her voice hoarse but unbroken. She looked at Michael with eyes too old for her face and whispered, "Shukran, thank you," as if 2 words could encompass what had transpired. One by one, they emerged. 23 children who would grow up, would dream, would perhaps change their nation's future. 23 arguments against hatred, 23 reasons why some things were worth any risk. Fatima, the teacher, survived. Concussed and damaged but breathing. She'd wake to find her students safe, her sacrifice validated. In a war where victories were measured in inches, she'd gained miles. The bomb maker was never caught. Somewhere in Fallujah's maze, they likely built more devices, spread more death. But on this day, in this place, their message had been rewritten. Death had knocked, and courage had refused to answer. Michael spent 2 weeks in the hospital. Concussion, lacerations, temporary hearing loss. Minor prices for major grace. Sarah cried when she heard, then laughed, then cried again. She understood. Wives of warriors always understood what couldn't be said. The official report was sanitized, bureaucratic, successful EOD operation, minimal casualties, mission accomplished. It didn't mention the singing child or the bloody hands or the moment when one man decided that protocol mattered less than humanity. But the soldiers who were there remembered. Told the story in quiet voices over beer and memories, how Staff Sergeant Michael Thornton had looked death in its mechanical eye and said, "Not today. Not these children. Not on my watch." The children returned to school 3 months later. The building had been repaired with American engineering and Iraqi determination. New walls rose where bombs had fallen, fresh paint covering scars that would never fully heal. Michael had been rotated home by then, his tour complete, but he'd left something behind. A letter for Yasmin written in careful Arabic with the help of a translator. It spoke of courage and choices, of how the smallest voices often sang the most important songs. She wrote back, her English improving with each letter. She told him about her studies, her dreams of medical school, her little brother who decided books were better than bullets after all. She never mentioned the basement, the darkness, the fear. Children had their own way of healing, forward motion and stubborn hope. The war ground on. More bombs, more casualties, more headlines that reduced tragedy to statistics. But in one Baghdad neighborhood, 23 children grew older, became teenagers, then adults. Some left Iraq, seeking safer shores. Others stayed, building the nation their teacher had envisioned. 5 became doctors. 3 became teachers, following Fatima's footsteps. 1 became an engineer, specializing in structural integrity. Buildings that could withstand anything. They carried their survival differently, some openly, others in silence, but they all carried it forward. Rodriguez lost his left eye to a sniper 2 months after the school. He joked that he'd traded it for 23 futures, best deal he'd ever made. The team that had held the perimeter that day became legend in the battalion, the ones who'd broken rules to obey a higher law. Michael struggled with return. Home felt foreign after Fallujah's intensity. He'd wake reaching for wires that weren't there, hearing children who were safe. Sarah held him through the nightmares, reminded him that he'd chosen light, that choosing light always came with shadows. He left the army after 10 years, became a paramedic, then a teacher, found ways to save lives that didn't require bombs or bullets. His students never knew their math teacher had once dismantled death with his bare hands. Heroes rarely advertised, but sometimes late at night he'd get emails from Iraq. Pictures of graduations, weddings, new babies. 23 lives branching into hundreds, thousands. A forest grown from seeds he'd refused to let die. Yasmin sent him a photo from her medical school graduation. She'd specialized in pediatric trauma, saving children who'd been caught in violence. The circle completing itself. In his desk drawer, he kept a small piece of wire, blue, corroded, harmless now. A reminder that courage wasn't about not being afraid. It was about being terrified and doing the job anyway. About believing that individual actions mattered, even when the world suggested otherwise. War doesn't create heroes, it reveals them. In the space between heartbeats, between breaths, between the click of an armed device and its potential detonation, ordinary people make extraordinary choices. Michael Thornton was a sergeant from Texas who missed his daughter and hated the desert heat. Nothing special, he'd insist, just a soldier doing his job. But 23 families in Iraq would disagree. 23 young adults building lives from moments that almost weren't. They'd tell you about the American who'd thrown away the rulebook, who'd bled for strangers, who'd looked at impossible odds and refused to blink. Courage multiplies. Those children grew up understanding that strangers could be saviors, that enemies weren't defined by nationality or uniform. Some joined peace organizations. Others became bridges between communities. All of them carried the lesson of that buried basement, that in the darkest moments light finds a way. Fatima still teaches, though her hair is gray now. She tells the story to new students each year, not for glory but for truth. That education is worth dying for. That knowledge threatens those who rule by fear. That sometimes salvation comes from unexpected hands. The school stands stronger than ever, its walls covered with children's art with dreams given color and form. In one hallway hangs a photo, blurry, taken by a soldier's phone. It shows a man kneeling before exposed wires, his back to the camera, his hands steady despite the chaos around him. No one needs to read the caption. They know. Michael retired to a small town in Texas, teaches high school now, coaches football, raises his daughter who's almost the age Yasmin was that day. He doesn't talk about the war much. But sometimes when students complain that one person can't make a difference, he tells them about 23 children who sing, because that's the truth warfare tries to hide, that individual courage matters, that choosing compassion over protocol can reshape futures, that a soldier on his knees in Fallujah can create ripples that cross oceans and generations. History books will record the battles, the statistics, the grand strategies that shaped Iraq's long trauma. They might footnote a school that survived, children who lived. But they'll miss the heartbeat of it, the moment when humanity won by the narrowest margin, when love disarmed hate with bloody fingers and desperate physics. Every war produces 10,000 stories of loss. This is one story of salvation, of Michael Thornton and Yasmin and 22 other names that didn't become casualties. It's proof that even in humanity's darkest expressions, light persists, sometimes as a song in a basement, sometimes as hands that refuse to let go. Remember their names, remember their courage, but more than that, remember the lesson, that in your moment of testing, when the easy path leads away and the hard path leads toward those in need, you too have the capacity for the extraordinary. We all do. It just takes choosing. Like this video, if you believe individual courage can change the world. Subscribe to hear more stories of forgotten heroes who refuse to let darkness win. Share your own stories of unexpected salvation in the comments below. This channel exists for those who understand that history isn't just shaped by armies and nations. It's written in the split-second decisions of individuals who choose compassion over safety, who become bridges across the abyss. Until next time, remember, heroes aren't born. They're revealed in the moments when running away makes sense and they choose to